It started with a splash. Cold water burst from a police-issued bottle, dousing the boy's face, shirt, and jeans, soaking him from the chest down. The crowd outside Mackenzie's deli froze. Conversations halted. Heads turned. A hush settled over the sidewalk like fog. Officer Clint Daniels stood over the boy, his arm still outstretched, the half-empty bottle dripping in his grip. He smirked the kind of smirk that said, "You don't belong here." The boy didn't move. Couldn't. His fists clenched tight around the straps of his school backpack. His eyes, wide and dark, locked onto the pavement. "Next time," Daniel said, stepping closer, "don't loiter around here like a damn stray. You people think you can just hang out wherever you want?" The words struck harder than the water. The boy, no older than 15, just stood there quiet, proud, humiliated. His name was Jalen Pierce. Slim frame, faded hoodie. He looked like any regular high school kid. But right now, standing soaked under the midday sun, he looked like a target. The crowd didn't speak. Some turned away. Others pulled out phones, but not one person stepped in. Not here. Not in Rockford Heights, where people knew better than to challenge authority, especially Officer Daniels, who'd been patrolling these streets like they were his personal kingdom for over a decade. Daniels flicked the empty bottle toward a nearby trash can mist, then barked, "Clean that up, boy." Still, Jalen said nothing, but behind his silence, behind the water dripping down his jawline, something was brewing. A storm, controlled, waiting. Daniels gave one last satisfied nod and walked off chest-puffed, boots stomping, not knowing he had just declared war on the wrong kid. The sun had barely risen over Rockford Heights, casting a pale light on the city streets. Jalen Pierce stood at the bus stop, his backpack slung over one shoulder, watching the traffic move like a quiet river of steel and exhaust. His mind wasn't on the cars or the people walking past. It wasn't on the fact that his shoes were getting worn down or that his hoodie had seen better days. His thoughts were elsewhere, focused on the upcoming day, another routine day, or so it seemed. A voice broke through the quiet hum of the city. "Jalen, wait up." Jalen turned, recognizing the voice of his best friend, Marcus, who was jogging to catch up. Marcus, always a few steps behind, was the kind of kid who liked to joke around, keep things light. He caught up with Jalen, huffing and puffing as they both stood waiting for the bus. "Man, you're looking serious today," Marcus said with a grin, nudging Jalen in the side. "You ready to take on another day of high school?" Jalen half smiled, but his mind was still elsewhere. He had bigger things to think about than the usual classes. His mother had been on his case for the past week, urging him to stay focused, to be careful. Jalen hadn't quite figured out how to juggle the weight of it all yet. His schoolwork, the quiet pressure of expectations, and the nagging feeling that he was being watched every time he stepped outside. The bus arrived with a loud hiss of air brakes, and the two of them climbed aboard. As the bus rolled through the streets, Jalen's thoughts drifted again. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed how the city seemed to shift around him, how certain areas were safer than others, how people looked at him differently, how he sometimes felt like a stranger in his own hometown. When he stepped off the bus, the school loomed ahead, familiar but distant, like the kind of place where you're meant to blend in, to disappear into the walls. But Jalen wasn't interested in being invisible. He couldn't afford to be. Jalen Pierce wasn't the kind of kid to draw attention to himself. He didn't need to. He wasn't loud or flashy. His presence was subtle, but it was powerful in its own way. At 15, he had learned to navigate the world quietly, never out of place, but never truly fitting in either. His friends saw him as a thinker, a quiet observer who always seemed to know more than he let on. Marcus, who had known Jalen since grade school, often joked that Jalen could probably solve the world's problems if he ever decided to speak up. But Jalen didn't like to be the center of attention. He wasn't the type to broadcast his thoughts or his emotions, preferring to keep things close to the chest. He preferred to stay under the radar, observing people, listening closely, figuring out the underlying patterns in their behavior. It made him feel like he had an edge, an ability to read situations and people better than most. In class, Jalen was quiet but sharp. His grades didn't reflect the full depth of his ability. He was always a few steps ahead, his mind constantly turning with ideas and solutions, but he had a way of staying under the radar. Teachers often underestimated him, assuming his calm demeanor meant he wasn't paying attention. They couldn't have been more wrong. Jalen's mind was a labyrinth of thought, always processing, always calculating, always looking for angles they couldn't see. But it wasn't just his intellect that set him apart. Jalen had been raised with a set of values that made him stand firm when the world tried to push him down. His mother, the police chief, had taught him the importance of respect, not just for others, but for himself. She had instilled in him a quiet strength, the kind of strength that didn't need to be loud to be effective. She'd also taught him to stay grounded, to understand the weight of power and the responsibility that came with it. In a world that often saw him as just another black teenager, someone to overlook, someone to judge, Jalen held on to a sense of his own worth. He understood what it meant to be underestimated. And he understood that sometimes the best way to deal with those who underestimated you was to stay calm, stay collected, and wait for your moment. Jalen wasn't just any regular high school kid. Beneath the quiet exterior, behind the soft-spoken words, lay something most people didn't know, something that set him apart from the rest. His mother, Police Chief Evelyn Pierce, had made sure of that. She had never been the type to push him into law enforcement, but she had made it clear from a young age that there was power in knowledge, in understanding the law, in understanding people, and in understanding how to defend yourself when the world didn't give you a fair chance. From the age of 11, Jalen had been training. At first, it was simple. Basic self-defense, how to handle a tense situation without escalating it, how to stay calm in moments of pressure. But as the years passed, the training became more intense. She taught him the same tactics she used in her job. How to read a suspect's body language, how to control a crowd, how to disarm an attacker, and how to de-escalate a volatile situation before it spiraled out of control. It wasn't about glorifying violence or teaching him to fight. It was about survival. It was about knowing when to fight, when to speak, and when to walk away. And above all, it was about respecting the power that came with knowledge. She made it clear that with every lesson, with every drill, came responsibility. And it was that responsibility that shaped Jalen into who he was today. Calm, controlled, and always thinking 2 steps ahead. Jalen never talked about the training. It wasn't something he needed to broadcast. In school, he was just another teenager. At home, he was just another son. But the skills his mother had taught him, those were his quiet armor. They were the reason he didn't flinch when Daniels humiliated him. The reason he knew exactly how to handle himself in any situation, no matter how tense. His mother's lessons were more than just physical. She had taught him the importance of integrity, of staying true to who you are, even when the world around you tries to strip you of it. And she had taught him one key lesson that resonated in his mind more than any other. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are. The street was quiet again after Daniels walked away, but Jalen's heart was still racing, not from fear, but from the simmering rage and the control it took not to lash out. He could feel the stares of the crowd on his back, the weight of their judgment, and yet he stood still. Later that day, just as the sun began to dip behind the buildings, Jalen was walking home from the bus stop. The memory of Daniel's smirk still burned in his mind. And then he saw him, Officer Clint Daniels again. This time, there were no people around, just the quiet hum of the city in the late afternoon. Daniels spotted him immediately, his eyes flashing with recognition. "You," Daniels growled, the venom in his voice clear. "I knew I'd see you again." Jalen didn't move, didn't flinch. He was just a kid on his way home. But Daniels wasn't having it. Still hanging around? Daniels stepped into Jalen's path, blocking him. "You must like getting treated like trash." Jalen's mind flashed back to the humiliation earlier, the cold water, the slurs. But instead of reacting, he just stood there, his gaze unwavering, his jaw clenched tight. Daniels wasn't done. "You think I don't know what you're up to? You think I won't do something about it?" He leaned in close, towering over Jalen, daring him to make a move. "I'll put you in cuffs, boy, and no one will bat an eye. No one will care." Jalen didn't speak, didn't react. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Stay calm. Watch. Listen. Don't let them see your anger. Keep it controlled." Daniel stepped even closer, his breath hot and heavy. "What's in that bag, huh? You carrying something? Maybe I should take a look." Jalen didn't budge. But the officer's words didn't scare him. They only fueled the storm within him, the calm before the inevitable eruption. The boy stayed respectful, but you can see he's quietly assessing, watching, calculating. Daniel stared down at Jalen, expecting him to break, to flinch, to react. But Jalen stayed silent, his body tense but controlled, his eyes unwavering. The officer was testing him, trying to provoke a response, but Jalen wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. Not today, not ever again. "Don't just stand there like a damn statue," Daniel sneered, his fingers twitching towards his belt, where his baton rested. The threat was there, hovering between them, but Jalen didn't flinch. Instead, Jalen, slowly, deliberately, shifted his weight. His body language shifted into something more focused, more alert. It was subtle, but Daniels noticed. The officer's hand hesitated, just for a moment, before gripping the baton more firmly. "You really want to push this, huh?" Daniels muttered, his voice laced with frustration. "I told you before, you don't get to act like you own the streets. Not around here." Jalen didn't respond, but his eyes flickered to the officer's hands, watching every movement. His mind raced, calculating the distance between them, the angle of Daniel's grip on the baton, the tension in the air. "He's trying to provoke me. He's waiting for me to make a mistake," Jalen thought. "But I won't give him that. Not today." The officer took a step closer, his chest almost touching Jalen's, trying to intimidate him with sheer size. But Jalen didn't back down. His calm demeanor was a steel wall that Daniels couldn't break. "What's it gonna be, huh?" Daniels growled, his voice low and threatening. "You gonna keep acting like a tough guy, or you gonna cooperate?" Jalen's gaze never left his. He wasn't scared. He wasn't even angry. He was just calm. His fists, still clenched tight around his backpack straps, were the only sign of the storm brewing inside. He knew exactly what to do. Keep calm. Let him make the first move. He'll slip up. Daniel stared at him for a few seconds, his eyes narrowing as he searched Jalen's face for any sign of weakness. But there was nothing, just a quiet strength, a calm that Daniels couldn't comprehend. With a grunt of frustration, Daniels took a step back, the baton still in his grip, but he seemed to hesitate, The tension in the air was thick enough to cut, but Jalen stayed as still as a statue. Daniels scoffed, shaking his head. "You really think you're smarter than me, huh?" Jalen didn't say a word. Finally, Daniels spat on the ground, his frustration bubbling over. "Fine, but you better watch your back, because I'm not done with you, kid." And with that, Daniels turned and walked away, his boots hitting the pavement with a finality that resonated in the quiet street. Jalen stood there, still and silent, letting the moment pass. The storm inside him hadn't raged. Not yet, but it would. Eventually. As Daniel's footsteps faded into the distance, Jalen stood still for a few moments longer, the weight of the encounter settling into his bones. His heart was calm now, steady. But the storm inside him hadn't gone anywhere. It was just waiting for the right moment to strike. He adjusted his backpack, feeling the weight of it on his shoulders, the familiar pressure that his mother had taught him to carry, the weight of knowing how to handle situations like this, even if no one else would ever understand. He took a deep breath and began walking, heading toward home, but his mind was far from the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. He was calculating, remembering, assessing every word, every move Daniels had made. Later that evening, in the quiet of their modest home, Jalen sat at the kitchen table, his mind racing with thoughts of the day. His mother, Police Chief Alexis Pierce, was working late again, as usual. It had become routine, the long hours, the endless calls, the weight of her position always hanging over their family like a shadow. She entered through the back door, her uniform crisp, the tiredness in her eyes evident even though she tried to hide it with a forced smile. "Hey, kid," she greeted, her voice warm but with an underlying edge. "Hey, Mom," Jalen replied, glancing up from the homework spread out in front of him. He tried to act normal, to seem like any other teenager, but he knew his mother could see through him. She always did. "What happened today?" she asked, no preamble, just the question hanging in the air. Jalen didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his hands, remembering the way Daniels had loomed over him earlier. He'd stayed calm, yes, but that didn't mean it didn't eat at him. The unfairness, the way Daniels had tried to force him into submission. "It was just another day," Jalen said, keeping his voice level. "You know how it is." His mother studied him for a moment, the silence stretching between them. She wasn't buying it. "You're too smart for me to believe that," she finally said, setting down her bag and sitting across from him. She exhaled deeply, then looked him straight in the eyes. "What happened with Daniels?" Jalen hesitated, then shrugged. Same as always, he tried to start something. He didn't get the reaction he wanted. Alexis's eyes softened, but there was something else in them now, a flicker of concern mixed with something more. Pride, maybe. "You handled it well," she said, her voice quieter now, almost like a whisper. "But you know, son, it's not always about what you can handle. It's about when you choose to act." Jalen nodded, even though he didn't fully understand. He'd been trained in restraint, in keeping control, but sometimes it felt like there was only so much you could take before everything broke loose. "I don't want you getting caught up in things you can't control," she added, her tone shifting slightly, a reminder of the reality they both lived in. "People like Daniels, they make their own rules. And sometimes, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how well you know the law. People like that still have the power." Jalen absorbed her words in silence, letting them sink in. His mother, the chief of police, knew exactly what it was like to walk in both worlds, to be the person in power and the person who felt powerless. But Jalen also knew that, in the end, it was always the ones who stood their ground, who stayed calm when everyone else lost their heads, that truly had control. "I know, Mom," he finally said, breaking the silence. But I'm not scared of him. She gave him a small smile, but it was laced with the understanding that he wasn't just talking about Daniels. He was talking about everything the world they both lived in, the system, and the battles that they both fought every day, in different ways. Good, she said, standing up to grab a cup of coffee. Just make sure you keep that calm in check, all right? I can't always be there to protect you, no matter what happens. Jalen looked up at her, a small, knowing smile creeping onto his face. I know, I've got it. As the night wore on and Jalen eventually headed to bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was coming. Officer Daniels wasn't done with him, not by a long shot, but neither was Jalen. Tomorrow would be a new day, and he was ready for it. The next day, Jalen woke up with a quiet determination. His mother's words still echoed in his mind. Make sure you keep that calm in check. It was the kind of reminder that stuck with you, the kind of advice that only made sense once you experienced the weight of the world yourself. And right now, Jalen was carrying that weight. He got ready for school, the same routine as always. The bus ride, the halls full of students, the teachers' lectures. But today, something felt different. The air was heavier, more electric. It wasn't just about getting through the day anymore. It was about something bigger. Something that had been building inside him since the moment Officer Daniels poured that water on him in front of Mackenzie's deli. By the time school ended and he made his way out of the building, the feeling hadn't gone away. Jalen's steps were quick, purposeful. He was heading home, but as he turned the corner onto his street, he stopped. There, leaning against the squad car parked by the curb, was Officer Daniels. For a moment, Jalen thought about turning back, about taking a different route home. But there was something in him that pushed him forward, a voice deep inside saying that it was time to face this head-on. Daniels saw him before Jalen even got close, his eyes locking onto him with that same smirk from the day before, the smirk that told Jalen everything he needed to know. Daniels wanted to humiliate him. He wanted to break him. But Jalen wasn't the same kid he'd been yesterday. He wasn't some target anymore. The officer pushed himself off the car as Jalen approached, crossing his arms over his chest. Well, well. If it isn't the kid who thinks he's above it all, Daniels said, his voice thick with mockery. Still walking these streets like you own 'em? Jalen didn't flinch. His gaze never left Daniels' face. What do you want, Daniels? His voice was steady, no hint of fear. Just the raw edge of someone who knew exactly who they were. Want? Daniels chuckled, his eyes narrowing. I just want to see if you've learned your lesson. Maybe you're finally ready to respect authority. Jalen took a step closer, the air around them tense with the weight of their history. I respect the law, he said quietly, but firmly. Not people who think they can do whatever they want because of a badge. His eyes locked with Daniels. And you don't scare me. Daniels' jaw tightened. The officer took a step forward, closing the space between them, his chest puffing up in an attempt to intimidate. Get out of my way, kid. You've got no idea what you're dealing with. Jalen stood still, unwavering. Maybe you don't know what I am. His words were low, but they carried weight. His posture, his calm demeanor, his refusal to back down everything about him now was a reflection of what he had learned from his mother, of how he had been trained to handle the pressure, to resist the urge to lash out. For a moment, Daniel stood there, unsure how to react. But then he chuckled darkly, stepping aside as if dismissing Jalen. You think you're smart, huh? You really think you're untouchable? Jalen's heart was steady, but his mind was racing, calculating. This wasn't the time to make a move. Daniels was looking for a reaction, a mistake, but Jalen wasn't about to give it to him. I'm not untouchable, Jalen said, his voice almost a whisper. "But I'm not afraid of you." Daniel stared at him for a long moment, then scoffed, shaking his head. "You'll learn one way or another, kid." And with that, he turned on his heel, getting into his squad car without another word. Jalen didn't move. He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment, the silence settling over them. And as Daniels drove away, he exhaled slowly, his heart still steady in his chest. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was waiting for the moment when it all came crashing down, when he would have to make a stand. And when that moment came, Jalen would be ready. The boy stays respectful, but you can see he's quietly assessing, watching, calculating. Jalen didn't yell. He didn't shove. He didn't even flinch when Daniels got in his face again. To anyone watching, he was just another kid trying to avoid trouble. But behind his steady eyes, Jalen's mind was working overtime. He noticed everything: the slight twitch in Daniel's right hand, the overcompensating stance, the way his radio crackled, but he didn't respond. Jalen clocked the time, the exact position of the squad car, the location of the nearest security camera at the corner store 2 blocks down. His mother had trained him to observe, to process fast, and to keep his emotions off his face. He remembered what she always said: "Power doesn't shout, Jay. It listens, it learns, and when the time comes, it speaks once and loud." So he stood there, absorbing it all. Daniel's body language, his tone, his threats. Jalen's silence wasn't fear. It was strategy. And even though Daniels thought he had just punked some street kid again, Jalen had already begun writing the report in his head. Every detail, every word, every violation. Because this wasn't over. It had only just begun. The precinct buzzed with routine noise, phones ringing, keys clacking, officers shuffling through paperwork. But the energy shifted the moment Chief Monica Pierce stepped through the front doors. She didn't slam them open. She didn't bark a word. She didn't have to. Heads turned, conversations halted. Even the vending machine seemed to go silent. Monica Pierce was not the kind of chief who demanded attention, she commanded it. Tall, poised, and always in a tailored navy blue uniform sharper than a blade, she carried herself like a woman who had earned every inch of the ground she walked on. She didn't speak to anyone at first. She just walked, past the front desk, past the bullpen, toward the back, where the internal affairs team had been quietly reviewing security footage from 2 separate incidents, both involving Officer Clint Daniels. Outside the room, she paused, her eyes locked on the monitor. The footage played on repeat. Daniels standing in front of Mackenzie's deli, a water bottle in his hand, the splash, the smirk, the slur. Jalen, drenched, silent. Her jaw tightened, but still she said nothing. Not until the door opened and Daniels walked in, oblivious, mid-laugh, retelling some version of the story to another officer like it was a bar joke. He froze the moment he saw her. "Chief," he said, stiffening awkwardly, "didn't expect to see you in today." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned to the screen, clicked a few keys, and played the footage again, this time from the second encounter. Daniels stepping toward her son, chest puffed, threats made. Her boy respectful, calm, focused. When it ended, Monica finally spoke. Her voice was ice. "That boy you poured water on, the one you threatened, the one you called a stray." She stepped closer now, not yelling, just low and lethal. "Was my son." Daniel's face drained of color. The room fell dead silent. "You assaulted a minor. abused your badge, and then tried to intimidate the son of your own chief, she said, her words slicing through the air. And the entire thing is on tape. Daniels stammered. Chief, I didn't know. I didn't mean. I don't care what you meant, she cut in. You knew he was a kid. That should have been enough. At that moment, the door behind them creaked open. Jalen stepped in. Not with fear, not with hesitation. With presence. He wasn't the soaked, silent kid anymore. He stood upright, his hoodie traded for a clean button-down, his eyes calm and cutting. He looked every bit like the son of a police chief, and something more. Like a mirror to everything Daniels was not. Daniels looked at Jalen like he'd seen a ghost. Jalen didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes was louder than any outburst. Daniels swallowed hard, suddenly realizing what everyone in that room now knew. He had picked the wrong boy. And the wrong mother. Daniels took an instinctive step back, as if distance could undo what had already been done. Chief, please. I didn't recognize him. I was just trying to keep the area clear. Monica didn't blink. You were trying to humiliate someone you thought no one would stand up for. That's the problem. Her voice wasn't raised, but the temperature in the room dropped anyway. Jalen, still silent, looked around, eyes scanning the badges, the uniforms, the faces of men and women who had watched Daniels get away with this behavior for years. And now, they couldn't meet his gaze. Officer Ramirez shifted uncomfortably by the filing cabinet. Sergeant Holloway suddenly found a reason to check his watch. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan above them. Daniels tried again. Chief, look, we're on the same team. No, she snapped, her tone shifting for the first time. We are not on the same team. She stepped closer, nearly nose to nose with him. My team serves this community. My team protects its children, especially the ones who get ignored, profiled, and disrespected. You serve your ego. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. Monica turned toward the internal affairs officer seated behind the desk. I want his badge on my desk by end of day. Full review. I don't care how many years he's put in. Then she glanced back at her son. You good? She asked gently. Jalen nodded, slow. Yeah. He said his first words since stepping in. I'm good. But it wasn't just an answer. It was a message. A statement. He hadn't just endured. He'd won without ever raising his voice. Monica turned back to Daniels one last time. You don't get to choose who matters. Not in my department. Not in this city. Not ever again. Daniels stood there, frozen in his uniform, watching the room around him dissolve authority, stripped, image shattered, silence crushing. And for the first time in his career, Officer Clint Daniels was utterly powerless. The next morning, the headline on the Rockford Heights Tribune was impossible to ignore. Veteran officer under investigation after video surfaces of racial misconduct. News vans circled the precinct like vultures. Reporters lined the sidewalk, microphones in hand, trying to catch a glimpse of the man at the center of it all. Inside, the department wasn't just tense, it was cracking open. Officer Clint Daniels sat in the interrogation room, no longer in uniform. His badge and gun had already been taken. The room was quiet, but his leg bounced under the table like a piston jittery, cornered. Two internal affairs investigators sat across from him, stone-faced. You violated department conduct on multiple counts, one of them began, sliding forward a thick manila folder. Abuse of authority, racially motivated harassment, endangerment of a minor. The list goes on. Daniels opened his mouth to defend himself again, but nothing came out this time. He just stared at the footage playing on the monitor in the corner. Again, and again, and again. Click, splash, silence. He winced every time the water hit Jalen's face. At noon, a notice was posted on the department's bulletin board. Officer Clint Daniels is hereby suspended pending formal termination, effective immediately. His desk was cleared out by end of day. No goodbye party, no retirement plaque, just a box of personal items and a long walk through the back exit, away from the cameras. And for the first time in years, the streets of Rockford Heights felt lighter. It was a week later, during a special community forum at the Rockford Heights Town Hall. The room was packed, not just with officials, but with residents black, white, old, young, all there because of what happened that afternoon outside Mackenzie's Deli. Cameras lined the back. A podium stood at the front, beneath the city seal and an American flag. Monica Pierce, in uniform, stood beside the mayor and the new interim sergeant. But the attention wasn't on them. It was on Jalen. He stood alone at the microphone, his hands steady, his posture straight, no hoodie, no backpack, just a simple dark button-up and the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the system from both ends. He cleared his throat. "I wasn't going to speak today," he began. "I didn't come here looking for attention. I didn't ask for it when I got soaked on a sidewalk just for existing." He paused. The room was silent. "But I guess, when something ugly like that happens, and people finally pay attention, you've got a choice. You can stay quiet, or you can speak for the ones who didn't get cameras. Who didn't get a headline? Who didn't get justice?" Someone in the crowd nodded. Another whispered, "That's right." Jalen continued, "I'm not special because my mom's the chief. I'm lucky because she taught me how to move smart. But this ain't about me. It's about what happens when power goes unchecked. When silence becomes normal. When people in uniform forget who they're supposed to protect." He looked directly into the front row where several officers sat listening, some with bowed heads. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't swing back. But I remembered everything. Every word, every stare, every step he took. A beat. And now he remembers me." The room was frozen, holding its breath. Jalen stepped back from the mic. Then, turning toward the officers, the cameras, and the crowd, he delivered the final line calm, unflinching. "I'm not here to be feared. I'm here to be heard. And trust me, I won't be the last." The room erupted. Applause not polite, but thunderous. A standing ovation. Even some of the officers stood, moved by the clarity, the poise, the power of the boy who had once stood drenched in silence. Jalen didn't smile. He just nodded once, then stepped off the stage and back toward the woman waiting in the wings, his mother. As the applause slowly faded, Jalen stepped down from the stage, each footfall steady, grounded. He didn't rush. He didn't look around to soak in admiration. That wasn't his goal. Waiting just off stage was Chief Monica Pierce, eyes proud, shoulders squared. But her expression softened in that way only a mother's could be. She hadn't clapped. Not because she wasn't proud, but because she had trained herself long ago not to react emotionally in uniform. But now, as Jalen approached, something in her cracked. Without a word, she opened her arms. Jalen, still composed, walked into her embrace. The cameras caught it, not a political hug, not a PR moment, but something far deeper. The reunion of a mother and son who had just survived the fire and walked out stronger. Monica leaned down and whispered in his ear, "You did more with your voice than some do with a badge." Jalen replied, Quiet but firm. You taught me how. The mayor stepped forward to say a few closing words, but the spotlight was already shifting. The crowd's focus turned not to the stage, but to the two figures descending the steps of the town hall. Mother and son, in lockstep. The press tried to rush them, flashing lights, shouted questions, but the path ahead was clear, not because security cleared it, not because Monica was the chief, but because for once everyone wanted them to walk freely. As they made their way down the marble steps, you could feel the shift in the air. A young black girl near the front row whispered to her dad, "I want to be like him." An older man in a Union jacket nodded solemnly and murmured, "That boy's got steel in him." Even some of the officers outside the hall, standing guard, offered small nods of respect. They reached the bottom step. Monica turned briefly to glance at the building, the system she had spent her life serving. Then she looked forward, chin raised, eyes sharp. Jalen did the same. No longer the boy drenched in humiliation. Now, a symbol, a reminder. As they walked toward the street, the sun broke through the clouds just enough to catch the gleam on her badge and the quiet strength in his eyes. No words were spoken between them. They didn't need any, because every step forward was a statement, and every silent witness watching them knew something had changed. In the end, the story of Jalen Pierce and Officer Clint Daniels is more than just a confrontation between a boy and an officer of the law. It's a reflection of a deeper societal problem, one that transcends the boundaries of Rockford Heights, one that stretches into every corner of the world where people are told they are less because of their race, their background, or their status. It's a story about power, dignity, the weight of history, and the lessons we must learn in order to move forward even when society is not prepared to meet us where we are. Jalen Pierce could have been anyone. He could have been any boy growing up in a world where, time and time again, he is taught that he is not enough, not smart enough, not important enough, not worthy enough of respect. The same world that raised Officer Daniels, who had come to see his badge as more than just a symbol of authority, but as a weapon to wield, a tool to control. He had forgotten the original purpose of his role, to protect and serve. Instead, he had come to believe that his badge and uniform entitled him to something deeper, to power over others, to the illusion that he could shape reality with a few well-placed words, a few acts of cruelty. But what Daniels didn't understand was this: power, real power, is not something that can be abused without consequence. Power is not about control, it's about understanding. Understanding that every person, no matter their background or the color of their skin, deserves to be seen as human first, not judged by assumptions. Jalen knew this in his bones. He didn't need to raise his voice, or even raise his fists. He understood that the world may not respect him immediately, but that respect could be earned not by submission, but by standing tall in the face of humiliation. And that was exactly what he did. He stood there in the heat of the moment, soaked in water, but not broken. For Jalen, his silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of defiance. The world expected him to retaliate, to lash out in anger, to fight fire with fire. But he knew that was the trap. That was the narrative that had been written about kids like him for years, that they would always be defined by their rage, that their power would always be measured by how much they could resist authority. Jalen refused to let that narrative define him. Instead, he chose a different path. He chose to stand firm, to remain silent, and to hold his ground. In that silence, he became the storm. The lesson here is profound. Strength is not always visible in the way people expect. It's not the loudest person in the room who is always the strongest. Sometimes, the person with the quietest presence carries the most power. In Jalen's stillness, there was a force more powerful than any threat. He wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. He wasn't afraid to endure the worst humiliation a man like Daniels could throw at him. And in doing so, he gave the world a glimpse into what real power looks like. It's the power to choose your response, no matter how the world tries to shape you. When Daniels finally realized who Jalen was, the true weight of his actions became clear. It wasn't the boy's age or his apparent vulnerability that had been his greatest strength. It was his integrity. It was his calm. It was the discipline instilled in him by a mother who not only believed in justice, but lived it every single day. The police chief, a woman who had spent her career fighting for equity and accountability, had raised Jalen to be different from the world that tried to tear him down. She didn't raise him to hate the system. She raised him to understand it, to respect it, and most importantly, to hold it accountable when it failed to serve the very people it was designed to protect. This moment of reckoning, this public exposure of Officer Daniels' abuse of power, is a reflection of something much larger. It's a symbol of the many hidden moments of injustice that occur every single day to people like Jalen who are seen as lesser, as disposable. How many times do we turn away, unwilling to speak up? How many times do we witness injustice but remain silent because it's easier not to get involved? How many times do we tell ourselves that it's not our problem, that it's not worth the fight? Jalen's decision to remain silent in the face of aggression was not just a personal victory, it was a call to action for everyone watching. It was a reminder that the fight for justice is never over. It is ongoing, and it must be fought on all fronts, in every quiet and every loud moment, until the scales of fairness are balanced. As Officer Daniels was forced to face the consequences of his actions, the true lesson began to unfold. Power without humility is not power, it's oppression. Respect cannot be forced, it must be earned. And those who seek to control others by tearing them down will always find themselves humbled by those who rise, despite the weight of the world upon their shoulders. Jalen's journey didn't end the moment Daniels was exposed. It didn't end when his mother stood beside him, walking out of the station with her head held high, proud of her son. No, Jalen's journey was just beginning. His strength would now be seen not only in his actions but in the way the world would look at him moving forward. He was no longer just the kid outside Mackenzie's deli. He was a symbol, a living, breathing reminder that dignity can never be stripped away by those who try to tear it down. But even as the world took notice, even as the narrative shifted from one of humiliation to one of triumph, Jalen never forgot that his journey wasn't about being seen as a hero. It was about something much bigger. It was about creating a space where boys like him no longer had to be seen as targets. It was about ensuring that no child, no matter where they came from or what they looked like, would ever again feel the weight of humiliation at the hands of someone who believed their authority made them untouchable. It was about making sure that every child, everywhere, knew that their worth wasn't defined by others' perceptions of them, but by their own strength, their own silence, and their own courage to stand tall when the world tried to push them down. And as Jalen walked away from that moment, shoulder to shoulder with his mother, the woman who had taught him more than just how to be a good person, but how to be a force for change, he knew that the true battle was just beginning. Because for every officer like Daniels, for every person who tries to break the spirit of the innocent, there is always someone, somewhere, who will rise. That is the power of resilience. That is the power of justice. And that is the power of those who refuse to be defined by others' hatred, but instead define themselves by their ability to endure, to resist, and to change the world.